It's always repeated that Marxists and communists infiltrated our schools for decades. If these are facts, then these facts answer how we've arrived here today. As a country, as Americans who are now aspiring towards two fundamentally incompatible republics. Those being one constitutional republic with democratic processes and a borderless democratic republic. Those are your two republics we're aspiring towards. And newsflash, they're not compatible. It does feel like since Americans were divided so effectively by everything you can imagine, race, gender, class, this has amounted to why we've lost our civic state and national unity projects. This explains why there are communities in America that chant death to America. There are anti-American colonies inside of our union now. So if you've ever felt like America is two different countries, you weren't wrong. There are two nations in this country, and that's why I'm in favor of realigning into the appropriate republics for this century. I believe that for all the division and subversion that we faced, our recourse actually looks like a long-term objective of putting those anti-American colonies that reside within the Union outside of the Union. If you want to live in a borderless democratic republic, if you have spent your entire life indoctrinated by educational or cultural means, that now you're some form of an ethno-masochist and you just want to surround yourself by communities that are so incompatible to the West, they'll help us implode from within. By all means, no one has the right to keep you from that future, but you can't maintain in the union with the rest of us without disrupting our national unity projects. This is a huge problem. And I understand the response to that is that, oh, we don't see territory to enemies, foreign or domestic. You may not understand that the only recourse for the amount of subversion that we've seen is separatism. I do believe Americans overlook that. Times are so strange that staying in a union is actually ceding territory. And I know that sounds backwards, but it's the truth. When you remain in a union with people who have vowed to bring your country down to her knees because in order for their democracy to rise, yours has to not exist anymore. In a really dark way, you cede territory to these people by existing with them in the same union. The amount of subversion that we've seen actually dictates that we have to realign into the correct unions or republics for this century. Because we were divided to the extent that we were, we don't have a choice. In English, I am making the claim that subversion dictates that separatism is your best vehicle. Why do two republics exist right now in America? Why are they competing at the voting and polling booth? Well, we were subverted. And as a byproduct of subversion, there came inversion. We have an inverting society that would weaken from within. Then you get women who embrace things like feminism. But in that quest of cerebral equality to men, we took a wrong turn somewhere. And I believe the government exploited that. I believe the government exploited that wrong turn. They began indoctrinating women and everybody with communism and liberalism. Liberalism especially, because fascism was able to enter the United States under the guise of liberalism. Fascism could masquerade as anti-fascism. Over time, you see women with their heart postures in the correct place, but they would give their children to the state to be raised. The state over time would teach children how to defend and grow the state's interests. It's a cycle. It's nasty, but that's our grim reality. What can we do but surmise that these ominous parallels have all contributed to why there are two republics on the horizon. I do believe there are at least 70 million Americans who believe they already live in a democracy. They could not tell you what democracy is as a form of government. They could not tell you what conditions democracy requires to be true. They just know that anyone they disagree with can be stamped with this nasty branding, this nasty scarlet letter of being a threat to their democracy. It's almost like it's just political strategy, and I believe it is. If you can call someone names enough, you substantiate harming them. We're so inverted as a society that the people who are marching in protest against kings are the very people who are turning an oligarchy into a class that has the same powers as a king. And as this is happening, they're relinquishing their First Amendment and Second Amendment rights. And that's impacting all of us. Every American will be impacted by that. It keeps me up at night because I know that once you lose your First Amendment right, you don't get it back, because you need a tongue to voice your regret of losing that amendment right in the first place. You cut out your tongue one time, that's it. No, the answer is not introducing term limits yet. The answer is not implementing America First policies yet, because it's the union that must be addressed first. If you put the cart before the horse, then any America First policies you implement will be undermined by the next administration, who is progressively advancing towards a different republic than you are. They don't even interpret the Constitution the same way that we do. I do believe that the solution America needs comes down to one objective. We have to reestablish our state, civic, and national unity projects that have corroded to time and corruption. We were divided, subverted, so we've lost these things that make us a nation, a social organism that can survive. We don't have consensus, in my view, on the three most important things a social organism should have. In order to be a nation, criteria is really straightforward. You should be able to agree on what republic you live in, on where government's natural station is. You need a consensus on what constitutional rights you will or will not accept. Make no mistake about what I'm saying. You are allowed to be beautifully diverse as a quilt. But the moment you lose the consensus on those things, you're not a nation anymore. It becomes your responsibility to understand that the groups who do have consensus on these things are their own nation. And that again points to why we have two nations in this one country. I will never not feel like Kamala Harris wasn't the most qualified presidential candidate for a borderless democratic republic. Her supporters have consensus on those three things that I mentioned. And the fact that we refuse to concede that it's the union that we must address, it really looks like we're going to have a heavy consequence for that. We're focused on red versus blue as a binary. I don't even think it's about red versus blue. That's the wrong binary for this century. The binary we should be addressing is between who wants to live in a borderless democratic republic or who wants to conserve the constitutional republic that we are. Addressing the union is in the name of averting civil war. It's in the name of recapturing our lost civic and state unity projects, our national unity projects. It's in the name of reinvigorating all of these systems and processes that we complain about. Our systems and processes feel like they're not working for us because they can't. They can't when you're in a union that's expiring. When you're divided so much that your systems stop working for you and they start working towards the wrong end, these are symptoms of a union that has to be addressed. The biggest consequence for failing to address the union would have to be devolving proportionate to our census size. Watching America become a borderless floating crust, a democratic republic where all of these incompatible interest groups share a union, they lose their free speech, they have no Second Amendment right. They're really not in a democracy, they're in a hybrid of it, because a democracy is only true if you can defend consent with the Second Amendment. And out of everything I've said, you're probably wondering, well, what's the mechanism to address the union? I've got news for you. You've got to start with Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution. Addressing the union has to start with addressing the state first. That's your first step, because you have a mechanism in the Constitution that actually allows for you to redraw state maps. Whenever you get to a nasty little place in time where you may be a red state, so they say, red versus blue, okay? You may be red, but say, for instance, all of your governor's races are dictated by small blue pockets. Just like we've seen out of Virginia this past election cycle, where if you look at a map, you might think that, holy cow, Winsome Earl Sears won. She didn't. Because there are certain parts of the North, there's certain parts of Northern Virginia that get to dictate what the entire state does. And so really what this reveals is that you have millions of people who don't have representation. And they also just found themselves with an AG that fantasizes about murdering political opposition and their children. Naturally, if you don't want to subvert the will of that election, because you know there are a lot of government workers and implants in Northern Virginia who work for government. They don't have roots in Virginia. They're there for a paycheck. But they get to govern over those people who do have roots in Virginia. And it's not fair. And there's a mechanism to correct all of this. The question is, will we use it? The fight begins with using Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution. You use Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution when you have lost representation. You have no foundational vision for the public good. You're not even sure you want to exist in the same republic anymore. You're just too different to sustain. And it doesn't even have anything to do with skin color. It's deeper than that. The mechanism you need is found under Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution. And basically, it allows for states to absorb others. It's an interesting little mechanism there. And you see this happening already in Oregon. I believe there are some counties in Oregon that are trying to be absorbed by Idaho. And it's a genius move. You don't need to subvert the will of that part of Oregon that's just become too different from a foundational kind of civic unity project perspective. You don't have to subvert their will. You can make sure they float alone on their own island. This is the age of getting ahead of just being contrarian to whatever the left wants. This is the age of saying, if you want to touch the stove, touch it. If you want that communist, have him. The rest of us are going to move beyond the radius of danger, and we're going to make sure that you can't govern over us, because you're chanting death to America. You want to live in a borderless, genderless, democratic republic. You're fighting to relinquish your First and Second Amendment rights. In fact, you're making educated defenses that you've outgrown these rights. Who am I to keep you from your future? The union should be addressed so you can have exactly what you want. I don't believe I'm crazy for hearing the admission that those who want to live in a borderless democratic republic don't want to exist in the same union as we do. It's not crazy to gather that when at least 70 million people make the claim that they have outgrown their First and Second Amendment rights, suddenly these things are dangerous. Suddenly borders are racist. They want government everything. They don't want any kings, but they want government everything. They're also making the admission that it's the union they've outgrown too. You'd be mistaken. You'd be making the wrong choice if you tell them you're wrong. You have to stay in this union with the rest of us. I've measured and weighed the pain and the consequences that will come from a possible national divorce, and that pain does not seem as painful as watching this country fall. Because over time we were divided, we were subverted, and we lost the ability to assemble beneath one flag. I think it's quite revolutionary that we've hit a moment in time where it's our union that has to be addressed. I would even posit respectfully, America was birthed from a separatist attitude. She would not exist if she did not break away from a monarchy. If that is in her DNA, I have no problem being bold enough to admit that her DNA tells her to cyclically and perpetually divide whenever her inhabitants become too incompatible to sustain. I can back that up by just looking at the way the political system was built. Someone built it so it constantly gridlocks to keep incompatible interest groups from oppressing one another. Gridlocking is the operative word there, because gridlocking only exists to buy you time. Why did someone build a gridlocking mechanism if it wasn't to buy you time to address the union when you hit a point in time where you could no longer sustain together? You either lost your national unity projects and statehood projects naturally, or over time, there was corruption. Somebody knew to divide America to conquer her. And I'm sorry, but all the symptoms are present that we can conclude that it has nearly worked. It's worked so effectively that we have to address the union, because a divided house can't stand. Even as I'm a conservative, if we're going to conserve anything, especially the meta-ideology that our Constitution is nested upon, you have to conserve something. You have to conserve a meta-ideology that would allow your Constitution to be interpreted in a way that it is restraining government and shrinking government. I'm a conservative for that reason. I like to conserve, and I realize I can't do that without practicing some form of separatism in the right century. Maybe every 200 or 300 years, we're supposed to address the union. Naturally, that should happen. It sounds a little nutty that I would quote that a divided house can't stand. People call me crazy for quoting it, but they won't call me a liar. My thought process is straightforward. America was subverted. That created a byproduct of inversion. When you're subverted as a country, it actually dictates that any strategy you produce to get yourself out of that inversion, it actually has to observe inversion's laws. If you're a soldier and your battlefield is inverting, to go left, you must go right. A soldier has to assimilate to inversion's laws if he wants to get out of that battle. So if you extend this thinking to America's circumstances, she was subverted, she's become inverted for it. Therefore, our recourse has to sound a little silly, but it may conserve the country. It is because a divided house can't stand that you actually have to realign into the appropriate republics for the century. Subversion dictates that that is the answer. The recourse to subversion will always be separatism, because in an inversion, you have to use separatism. You have to use really interesting kind of ways to get yourself out of the inversion that you're in. So naturally, you may feel like punching your enemy back on the chin. But if you're in an inversion, the punch you throw is going to land on your own face. This is why I know subversion was a weapon formed against America. It was to divide us. It was successful. Subversion always births or breeds inversion. And when societies are inverting, they don't know left from right, up from down, men from women, dogs from cats. They start to invert. So that's why they're easy to conquer. Okay? So if a divided house can't stand, and you've had inversion thrown your way and subversion, you actually have to realign into the appropriate republics. If a divided house can't stand and you've been divided so tyrant classes can come in between that divide and keep dividing you, then you actually need to form two new bodies that can move towards their coordinated ends. It's difficult to explain, but the more you're divided and you stay together, the easier you are to divide. You're forced, understand, as a social organism, to cure the divide by realigning into the groups you were divided into. This is how tyrants lose control. They use division as a weapon. But if you take away their ability to weaponize the division, you actually move towards coordinated ends, and you survive as a social organism or nation. This is why I stand on the business that people who want to live in a borderless democratic republic should. I'm going to keep saying it until I'm blue in the face. It feels like there are two nations in this country called America because there are two republics being competed for. And most of what I'm saying sounds divisive to people who won't accept that we were already divided to begin with. Subversion has been a weapon launched upon our senses for generations. You add the context all you want about when subversion arrived, who's to blame. Assert whatever context you feel is missing. It won't contradict the fact that it feels like there are two nations in this country because there are in fact two republics being competed for. And until we address that, we're going to keep a divide wide open. Tyrant classes are going to have all the space and opportunity to move their agendas forward. It is when you take away the fact that they've weaponized dividing us that you actually stand a chance at conserving America. And that does mean that you need to place people who want to live in a borderless democratic republic outside of the Union. Why? Because they will continue to assault this Union until the constitutional republic falls and their borderless democratic republic can rise. Make no mistake, redistricting is real cute, but redrawing state boundaries is the first step towards addressing the Union. Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution is the most brilliant mechanism, and no one's saying it's going to be easy. In fact, we have to address why anybody thinks that they can fight to save America without going through any pain or inconvenience. That's one of the most troubling things I find out of the more conservative space. As a conservative myself, I listen to people claim that they want to save America, but at any sign of inconvenience or trouble, they're hooping and hollering. What if saving America means being inconvenienced for 5 years, 10 years, 10 months, 2 weeks? Is this country worth saving or not? Whatever inconveniences and pains you can list when it comes to realigning into the appropriate republics for the century, I guarantee you it won't hurt as much as watching this entire country become lost. Because when you had the mechanism to start redrawing maps, you chose to spend time being entertained online by reaction artists, by people who just want to bring you reactions to the latest SCOTUS ruling. Here's the objective I have long-term in my head. It looks like averting political persecution that's going to come from socialists, Marxists, and communists should they ever get power back. It looks like redrawing maps so that the Electoral College is captured by those of us who want to conserve the constitutional republic that we are. It looks like concentrating those who want to live in a borderless democratic republic in their own republics, in their own spaces. The alternative is actually remaining in a union where the political pendulum is going to swing back to the left. Sorry to break it to you, but if you don't want to live in a borderless democratic republic, you're on the menu. Nobody's coming to save us. I will never not believe that in 2025 and beyond, the solution we need as Americans looks like addressing statehood, redrawing those maps, advancing towards the recapture of your civic state unity projects. It may be likely that you capture the Electoral College for years to come. Those are the years you use time to create a mechanism to address your union and to overturn Texas versus White. I don't believe Americans are enemies, and I don't accept that these ideas flame civil war. Make no mistake, as we exist now, you have AGs in states that can openly fantasize about murdering political opposition and their children. What am I supposed to believe about this warning that should we address the union, we're going to invite civil war? If you don't address the union, you're looking at the same damn consequence. It is hard for me to believe that if counties in Oregon are successful at becoming a part of Idaho, then someone in New York City will call for war. It is worth mentioning that under Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution, when you redraw maps, you're still in the same union, and knock knock, you have the military. You have the best timeline and deterrent on our side today. Should we redraw maps? Should national divorce become a headline? Do you really think someone in Delaware is going to come after you in Texas? I don't believe it's a naive take of me to say. I think we're so spent as a country, as two republics trying to exist in one union. If Texas wanted to secede, no one would come after them. War is not acceptable in this generation. I choose peace. I dedicate a time for debate and discourse, and then once I begin to see that it's going nowhere and we're hemorrhaging time, sprinkle on top of that calls for the deletion of people who hold my political opinions. Mind you, I only believe that we should have borders. As a Christian woman, I'm pretty traditional. I want to shrink government. I would love to put America first. If these ideas are so radical, if wanting to conserve my First and Second Amendment rights mean that I'm radical, I have to look at the accusers who think it's radical as if they've outgrown the union with me, with the rest of us. Separatism is the only answer. How much longer do we have to debate one another? Before the Supreme Court is packed, we lose free speech. And every single idiot who wanted to debate people for 10 plus years, instead of understanding the dangers, we're all going to have egg on our face. And that might be the realest take I have. When you remain in a union with people who don't want their First Amendment, you are damned to lose it. And it'll be your fault, because you surrounded yourself with antelope who were removing their horns and surrounding themselves with lions. You decided to handcuff yourself to the antelope. You decided to debate the antelope. And that might be the creepiest thing about all of this. It is so inappropriate to debate people who have openly called for your murder, for your deletion, who have openly called for you to lose your First and Second Amendment rights. It's inappropriate in 2025 and beyond. I'll back that up by making this claim. If we're talking about the scale of subversion that we're talking about, baby, You have no business debating someone who's subverted anyway, because they're loyal to party. You're not going to infiltrate their minds. You don't have the power to change someone's cognitive ability when they've been subverted. And if you think you do, you don't understand the power of subversion. You don't understand why it is the weapon it is. Subversion weakens something from within. Subversion breeds inversion, so you spin out of control and chaos. That's why tyrant classes use subversion. It's so they can divide. You can divide a society that's inverted easy. And then down the line, you'll get an extra little gift. You ready for it? Subverted populations are loyal to party. Who's debating subverted populations who want to live in a borderless democratic republic? Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution is what we need. It is the first step in ultimately addressing our union and our republics in the 21st century. If you want to throw America a lifeline so she can have another 100 years to exist as a constitutional republic where a constitution restrains government, you weren't called to pick up muskets. You were called to address your union. You have a different fight than your ancestors had. Our war is making sure that anti-American colonies who have vowed to assault the republic from within are placed outside of the union so they can assault this country no more. I want to be very clear. People who want to live in a borderless democratic republic have every right to exist. But we cannot exist together. Fundamentally, we are too incompatible. And that's not something I decided. It is a fact of our reality. It is a fact that if you want to live in a borderless democratic republic, you are aspiring towards a constitution where you will have less First and Second Amendment rights. You won't have a border. You won't have it. And for every single person that says, oh no, it's just we've got to fix our systems and processes. Diagnose America. If you have two republics on the horizon, competing until one has a death, the reason your systems and processes aren't working for you is because it's the union you have to address. We're looking at all the symptoms that it's our union. It's the two incompatible republics that we're competing for. And yet we just want to throw the same strategies at the wall. And then we bang our heads against the wall and we ask ourselves, why isn't anything working? America has gone above and beyond in terms of identifying the corruption. But we have sucked tremendously at finding solutions and strategies. And here we are, of all shapes, sizes, colors, and flavors, and we're trying to figure out how to escape a demographic of at least 70 million people who want to live in a borderless democratic republic. Their polling and voting statistics show that that's the republic they want in this century. And damn it, if you feel disheartened and scared, I at least want to get the word out about what solutions we may have, because they exist. We're just not finding them. What I want to make very clear is that Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution is the mechanism we need. I do not believe in being contrarian to people who say that they don't want their First and Second Amendment rights anymore. I believe them. I believe them so much that I think they should live and exist in their own union where they don't have those things. Because it's not fair that they cut out their tongues and they would cut out mine too. My ancestors were slaves and they did not die for me to reach my adulthood. to find myself surrounded with no borders, with the inability to speak my mind, with the inability to have a Second Amendment right. My ancestors did not slave for me to arrive to this point in time where I would look at government, call it corrupt, and then grow that same government. My ancestors did not slave for me to build or contribute in any way to a borderless democratic republic. Your ancestors did not slave or fight for you or settle in America for you, depending on what background you come from, for you to lose this country. Unfortunately, we were divided, we were subverted. And the consequences that now two republics exist in this nation, and those republics are so fundamentally incompatible that we are corroding the very fabric of this nation. Now, if a nation is an expression of a family unit, I'm telling you, there are pockets of this country who are already their own nation. If you do not put them inside of their own republic or union because you're concerned about how divisive that's going to look, they're going to take power over you. And Marxist socialists and communists don't care too much for how they look when they delete their political opposition or persecute their political opposition. To avert civil war and to move in the spirit of peace, the answer today is separatism, unless you have the right answer. You tell me how we can be divided on the scale that we've been, and how the answer is integration. I promise you, your neighbor who is a Kamala Harris supporter will always seek to live in a democratic republic that is borderless. Unite on that fact. Unite to realign. Unite so that everyone has what future they're aspiring towards. But we cannot feign national unity projects because they don't exist. And the longer we feign, tyrants have room for their agenda. I want to be very clear. If a divided house can't stand, cure the divide. Cure the divide. It is the union that must be addressed. I stand on that. And until someone else has a solution that does not sound like they are trying to implement America First policies inside of the union that is expiring, I'll change my position. I'll change my position as soon as someone presents me with an alternative idea. Until then, I will always believe that we are aspiring towards two incompatible republics.